Welcome to lesson 9.4. What role did agriculture play in the growth of Western Canada? Again, we're going to be taking a look at Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So stick around and let's learn something. Nine point four is the lesson, like I mentioned. What role did agriculture play in the growth of Western Canada? If you've ever gone for a car ride here on the prairies, you are going to see a lot of farms because that's what they were doing. They were farming the frontier. The national policy that Macdonald had in place called for immigration. This is step number 2 of his national policy. So they needed to convince people to come out west to farm these lands. And these farmers became the backbone of the Canadian West. Thanks to the railway, people began arriving in the late 70s and early 1880s. So what was the land policy in the West? Well, the government of Canada sent out surveyors. And we've seen this before. They were not just marking the border at the 49th parallel, but surveyors were also sent to divide the land, to divide these prairie townships, as you can see here on the image. So land was divided into prairie townships. Each township is divided into 36 squares called sections. So you can see on the image here, we've got 36 squares on this prairie township. Each of those sections is then divided even further into 4 quarter sections. So we've got a couple of maps here, and this tells you how it would look like. And they were 10 by 10 kilometer squares was a township, further divided into 36, further then divided into quarter sections. And all of the Northwest Territories was marked out this way. And you can still see this today if you ever fly over the prairies. You can see these, how they've been set up. They're still there. These surveyors, though, who divided the land like this, totally ignored the way the land was already divided, which was based on the seigneurial system from the Canadiens. And the seigneurial system made its way into the prairies because of the Métis, and they brought that system of dividing the land with them. And the seigneurial system, for those of you who don't remember, long story short, everybody has, it's strips of land, not squares of land, and everybody has access to water that way. In a prairie township divided into these squares, these sections, not everybody has access to water. 2 of these sections of each township, you have to have schools, and the other section is going to belong to the Hudson's Bay Company. Or schools or Hudson's Bay Company. Another section is going to be set aside for the CPR, free land for the Canadian Pacific Railway. So they are going to be actually getting a lot of land. Anything that's left, so anything that's not designated as a school, anything that's not designated as a HBC property, and anything that doesn't belong to the CPR is free for anybody to use. So you can see here on the map, we've got the 36 sections, but look how much is owned by the Canadian Pacific Railway. Look at the schools. We've got 2 sections for schools, and we have 1.75 sections for the Hudson's Bay Company. The rest is going to be divided between the CPR and free homestead land. So not a lot of land, actually, when you take a look at it. In 1872, the Dominion Lands Act is passed. And this is another image here of these sections and how they were divided up. So the Dominion Lands Act stated that any head of a family can apply for land. Not only that, but any male at least 21 years old can also apply for land. Each applicant is going to receive a quarter section, and that is going to be called a homestead. Each quarter section, each homestead, is going to cost $10. And in 1882, they allowed women to apply. And here's what they needed to promise. Each applicant who goes and buys this land promises that they are going to live on this land for at least 6 months out of the year. They are going to build a house, and they are going to start a farm. But life is going to be very tough here. Homesteading was not an easy thing to do. It was very difficult. First of all, the people coming out, they were poor, so they couldn't afford farm tools. They couldn't afford livestock. They couldn't afford seed for their crops. They couldn't afford the materials for their homes and their barns. And many of the crops ended up failing because of the harsh prairie environment that existed at the time, which consisted of grasshoppers, little rain. There was periods of drought there. If you are on the prairies and you've been here for a while, you know that the frost and the winter come early. So we have this early frost to deal with. And our summers are not much better. We often have quite a few hailstorms. So a lot is working against these newcomers that are coming out. Who are these newcomers that are coming out? Well, they're coming from Ontario. The government begins to sell, there's my air quotations, sell the West. So they're trying to convince people to move out west. They send agents into Ontario to advertise the West and get these people from Ontario out into the West. So the first newcomers, like I mentioned, are coming from Ontario. There was already people that were living there, though. That's a problem. And the farmland was scarce. Okay, that was this is what's happening in Ontario. So let's head west. So there's already a lot of people that are in Ontario. There's all the good farmland is taken. West we go. So there's so many people from Ontario that head west that Manitoba, actually in the 1870s, was nicknamed New Ontario. They're very creative with their names, aren't they? Quebec farmland was also scarce, but the agents did not head over to Quebec because they did not want the Canadiens to move out west, because as part of a long plan, Canada wanted to have the English dominate the landscape. Instead, the Canadiens moved to New England down in the United States to get jobs. But we need more people, okay? The farmers from Ontario are not going to be enough. So we need more people. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to head over to Russia. We're going to send agents over to Russia, and we're going to get Russians to come over to Canada. In this period of our history, the Russian Tsar, he required conscription, which means all adults need to attend military service for a specific amount of time. Well, the Mennonites, who are from Russia, they were a religious minority living there that did not believe in war, therefore did not feel like they should have to be involved in conscription. So the Canadian agents that went over, they told the Mennonites, hey, come to Canada. You can practice your religion freely. It's a new country. Come on over. Why not? You can stay together even, and you can farm collectively. And the first group of Mennonites who came over, they settled just outside of Winnipeg. 7,000 people in total actually came over. And they were able to prove what the Ontario farmers were unable to do. They were able to prove that the prairie land could be farmed. They just needed a heavier plow to do it. And in total, they actually created about 100 communities in Western Canada. That wasn't enough, though. We're going to get people from Iceland as well. So in 1875, there was a natural disaster in Iceland. The Askja, I think is how you say it, volcano erupted. And the poison from that volcano, from that ash, poisoned the land, so crops couldn't grow, and killed a lot of the cattle. So many Icelandic refugees ended up coming to Canada. In exchange for their arrival, Canada gives them 800 square kilometers of land just north of the city of Winnipeg on Lake Winnipeg, which was nicknamed New Iceland, by the way. Again, very creative with the names. They named the community Gimli, which means paradise. So it allowed them to live together on a large piece of land. They could speak Icelandic. They could keep whatever cultural customs they had. And the Canadian government said, hey, you know what, guys? You can make your own laws too. But the problem was the climate. It was harsh. There was starvation. There was floods. And of course, there was smallpox disease that they had to combat as well. We still have people that we haven't talked about in this lesson. And that is our First Nations. So many First Nations, because of the decline in buffalo, began farming. And they farmed near Red River. We learned about that in the last chapter. They were with the Métis. They signed treaties with Canada, and Canada promised that they would assist them in farming. So these treaties not only would help them in their farming techniques, the treaties guaranteed land, they guaranteed animals, tools, seed for crops, and all that kind of stuff. But many of the First Nations saw the treaties as unfair. The land that was promised by the Canadian government was not good for farming. The tools that were promised weren't delivered. The farming techniques that they were being told that the government would teach them, well, the instructors, they didn't come out to teach these techniques. And those who did, very few of them actually came out. The First Nations, they faced racism, and they were barred from buying equipment. And at the same time, because of that, they had a hard time selling their crops as well. So even if you were able to farm and have successful crops, people would not buy from you. All right, head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.